really is a homecoming. I've been working on these issues with CEP for quite a few years. So I'm very happy that this is essentially a virtual book launch for me. There will be a physical one in Oslo next week, and I'll be doing some other events, but I'm very happy to be doing this first one with CEP. Had it not been for the CEP and had it not been for Hans Schindler, I'm not sure this book would ever actually come out. So I mean, credit where it's due. So that's a first that I would like to start with. And thank you for having me again. Thanks to Michael for taking the time to be here with us, because obviously his book a year ago touched upon an area, and you will see that through the presentation that Michael wrote about Azov. And Azov is one of the, used to be, or it still is one of the platforms for foreign fighters, foreign volunteers to be involved and then participate in the Russo-Ukrainian war. So obviously there is a bit of an overlap, and we chat and discuss certain issues from time to time. Very happy to see some friends amongst the audience as well. And look, it's my pleasure, and I'll do my best to both be informative, to provide you with the main points of the book, and at the same time be engaging and, you know, dare I say, entertaining to some extent. The topic is grim enough, let's put it this way, so that if there is a bit of, I don't want to say entertainment, but, you know, showcasing this in a lighter at times way shouldn't hurt at all. I have a presentation, and I'll go for this presentation and I'll share my screen, and then obviously you will probably hand over to Michael. So let me do just that. This is basically how it looks at the moment. How the book looks like. It's been deliberately chosen. Obviously, the book was, you know, I signed the contract for the book back in 2020 when I was still working on this project with CEP. And obviously, you know, we had a bit of a headache there, and I'll be sure with you, and you know, I'll be open and honest with you once, you know, we were choosing the cover, for the very simple reason that there's been a remarkable transformation in terms of who volunteered for this war. That in 2014 you had a slightly different, to put it mildly and diplomatically, class of people who volunteered for the war. And this book is also about 2014, 2015, 2016 when they were there, you would have to have a completely different picture on the cover. I'll tell you and I'll show you who these guys were. And I'll also discuss the transformation of a typical volunteer for the war and for Ukraine in this case, but it's a completely different set of people. And obviously, once the book was being, you know, was being prepared, readied, and printed, I couldn't have thought of a better image than this one to actually showcase the fact that, you know, we're in this fight, they are in this fight, and the class of 2022 of those volunteers is a completely different group of people. And, you know, this presentation will be about that. I'll try to show you what this is, how this actually happens. So essentially, this is the snapshot. This is the contents of the book. And the highlighted bits are the ones that I will touch upon. So essentially, there's a few points that I really want to focus on. And I'll start with the concept of what is called what I call the Western European Foreign Fighter Secret Society. So I'll define what that is and how it actually informs my research and how it informs my look on this, you know, how I talk about this issue and how I deal with it in 2022. I will tell you a thing or two about the hosts of the foreign fighters, or the foreign volunteers, because they come in, they cannot just come in and do their thing. They need a platform, they need a launch pad for their activities, and it's not everyone who is involved in the conflict who can be such a launch pad. So obviously we have to look at the hosts. I will tell you about probably what used to be the most shocking finding of my earlier bits of my research, that, you know, the fighters initially flocked to both sides of the conflict back in 2014. And one of them said to me that he thinks that they are the two sides of the same coin. They were coming from the same ideological milieu, yet they were happy to shoot at one another in Ukraine. That was the thing. And I think that was the shocking thing that hit me very early on, and it kind of I carried this thing up until now. But, you know, I realized that good few years ago, but I think this is, if there's one thing you need to, you know, remember from this presentation, this is it. But I'll give you the specifics in a second. And I'll talk about the motivations of different national sets of fighters in the conflict, especially early on. So the French fighters who went to join the so-called separatists, who went there because they were saying, hey, I'm there to fight American imperialism. And I remember we're talking French fighters in 2014, not in 2022 on the Russian side, who would probably, it would be easier to imagine, you know, given the US support, given the European support, that they are actually fighting some kind of imperialism, if you convince yourself, of course. But back in 2014, they were also saying this. Then you had a group of Swedish fighters who were actually saying, well, I'm there because I don't want this war to come to my place. I don't want this war to come to my country. And now this is a recurring this is recurring motivation, very much so also in 2022, when you have the fighters from the likes of my country, Poland, Baltic states, Czech Republic, who are deliberately saying, hey, I'm fighting it in Ukraine because obviously I'm afraid that next it's going to be in my country. So it's better to fight there, not at home. Then we'll also stay in the region, Central Eastern Europe, where some of the fighters were coming into the conflict zone, who appeared brown, meaning far right, but in reality were also red, meaning far left. And it's a bizarre mixture. You see less of it in Western Europe, but especially Czech and Slovak fighters. But some from other countries of the region, they were very much of that flavor, and it needs to be showcased. That was another, maybe not a shocking, but an illuminating finding for me. Obviously, a few words, chapter 10 in my book, 10th chapter is elephant in the room. An elephant in the room in this conflict, it's the Russians. Tens of thousands of Russians who fought on the side of the separatists in 2014, and you have all sorts of volunteer formations also involved on the side of Russia, consisting of Russians back in 2022. And lastly, and probably this will be the biggest part of the presentation, is we need to make it modern as contemporary as possible. So 2022, the concerned citizens of the world, no longer the radicals of 2014, no longer the brown-red cocktail, as someone pointed out to me, it should be actually red-brown. This is the proper terminology in political science. I get that, and of course I appreciate that, but at the same time I deliberately switched it because there was simply more brown people than red flocking to the conflict. So that was no pun intended, if I could put it this way. So let me walk you through it, and I'll try my best to be engaging and entertaining. So I'm sorry, I went back. So the first issue, the Western European Foreign Fighter Society. So essentially, I would claim the foreign fighters nowadays who go to conflicts and do not join terrorist organizations, they stick together. They know each other and they know of each other, and they communicate with one another, regardless of which unit they're joining. And sometimes even, as it was the case in the war in the Russo-Ukrainian war, sometimes regardless of the side that they're joining. They have the tendency to share contacts, phone numbers, etc., and they have this peculiar tendency to resurface in other trouble spots. Many of them just go home and forget about it, fine. But some of them, and it's not 1%, it's way more, they have this tendency to come back. And this comeback is perfectly captured here. These are the Yellow Vests protest of 2019. And on the right, the guy holding the Donetsk People's Republic flag, the guy beard and mustache, Serge Mounier, he's French, half Russian, born in Luhansk in eastern Ukraine, now this alleged Luhansk People's Republic. Serge fought for the separatists in 2015, I think, former French army. He participated in the 2019 Yellow Vest protest, but that's not the end of his engagement. In 2022 and in 2023, he's fighting for the Wagner Group in Russia, on the Russian side. You might have heard of the Wagner Group. So to show you how these guys can pop up and come back. Now, you could say he is a peculiar case, but at the same time, I could point out to maybe less spectacular cases, but yet cases when these guys come back. And I think on the other side, the interesting bunch are the people who fought in 2014 in the so-called foreigner group of Azov. Now, these guys, and quite a few of them, they actually came back in 2022 to Ukraine. So it's not that they finished their career with one conflict. They somehow, you can recycle them, and they recycle themselves for different wars and different conflicts. And why I call them the secret society, because we know of their existence, or I would define it as that there is a connection, there's a network of them, of these guys. And I know this exists, I know this happens, but I'm not privy to their discussions. There are certain rituals. There is a certain, you need to have a certain street cred, and you need to be brought into the society because you fought somewhere, or somewhere, you can be trusted. Now, the best I could get close to this as a researcher was that someone referred to me, oh, he's neutral, you can talk to him. But he's not positive. He's not, he's not our guy. We're not sure we can trust him. And I think for a researcher, this is the safe distance in a way, but that means you will not progress onto the level of their discussions. But for me, such a society exists. It's been going on for years. It will come back. You know, some of these guys were present in the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. Some of these guys also went to fight as all sorts of mercenaries and private military contractors in different conflict zones in the Middle East and Africa. And they will resurface somewhere in the future. You know, they have this tendency to do that. That's why I call them the Western foreign fighter. And it's a secret society, because at the end of the day, you know, there's a limit to what we know and what we can know about this. And Serge is one of the classic examples. The second point I'm looking at in the book is the hosts. So the host units, and obviously here is probably the most famous one, the one that's been, and Michael knows a thing or two about them, the one that's been quite often described as the quintessential unit that was hosting foreign fighters and that was actually happy to field them. Now, a bit of a disappointment for our participants, because this is Azov, of course, you know, this is the Azov regiment, and Azov regiment fielded the massive number of literally two Western foreign soldiers, right? You cannot no longer actually call them fighters because they were actually in a unit of the Ukrainian army, but okay, let's, for the sake of this presentation, well, let's call them foreign fighters, during the siege of Mariupol in 2022. A Swede and a Brit, and I've spoken to one, so I have a 50% coverage of the issue. So that shows you how certain things might spin out of control. They were there, they had been there, they are still there, don't get me wrong, but sometimes our understanding of how influential they are and how important they are and how, you know, what kind of a difference they make, it's sometimes overblown. But anyways, foreign fighters need platforms. They need a local unit they can join, or even if they form their own, a local umbrella above them. Azov was one of them, right sector was one of them on the Ukrainian side, but you had many like that on let's say pro-Russian side. You had the so-called 15 or Piatnashka group in the Republican Guard of the Donetsk People's Republic. Foreigners were heavily present in units led by the Prizrak Brigade, the Ghost Brigade of the separatist militias. They were present in units such as the Batman Battalion and Brigade. You know, forgive me the names, they're other interesting names, but these were the call signs of their commanders. That's how their units were known. And not all of the units fighting on side A or B in this conflict wanted them, and not all appreciated them. It was actually a very much an uphill struggle, especially for the foreign fighters who were joining the separatist, inverted commas, militias on the pro-Russian side, because they didn't know if they were to be trusted. You know, they were really treating them with lots of suspicion. At the same time, there was a kind of a paranoia gripping the so-called separatist side that if any die, then we're in deep trouble. So maybe we just put them in front of the camera, or we put them, you know, in some safe spot on the front line, so we're not embarrassed. But of course, we need them in front of the camera so they can fundraise for us. They can fundraise in their own countries. Ukrainians had a different approach to that, and they were using and fielding their foreigners, especially if these foreigners had something to sell them in terms of the qualities and the battlefield, let's say, you know, tactical acumen. They were happy to do that, but again, not everyone was happy to take them. And I think part of the legend of the foreign fighters on the Ukrainian side that, oh, they all joined right sector and Azov, is also because that these were the only formations, apart from like really few others, like, you know, either battalion, that were happy to have them. Otherwise, they wouldn't, for a variety of reasons, especially, you know, there's a linguistic barrier. You know, if you have a foreigner deployed in such a unit, he needs a local fixer translator. Effectively, you can call him, the foreigner, essentially a backpack for that Ukrainian soldier, because that Ukrainian soldier needs to carry that person on his back and actually translate and provide certain things for the foreigner. That's why certain units were actually not happy to have them. And it's even continued in 2022. You know, if you speak to the 93rd Brigade, which is fighting south of Bakhmut, and it's an artillery brigade, and, you know, I had the chance to chat with, you know, through intermediaries, to chat with the officers, and they were saying, look, if I was to teach a foreigner our standards of how we deal with artillery and communicate with them effectively, well, that's kind of hard. So I prefer a local recruit, and I prefer if that foreigner actually gives me money, you know, fundraises for me for some drone or some medical supplies. But I prefer a local recruit with whom I can communicate in Ukrainian or Russian or a mixture of the two, Surjik. That is the reality that we also have to remember. And obviously, you know, in certain cases, and that is an important point, the foreigners were a mixed blessing for either side in this war, you know, because sometimes this in 2014, 15, 16, I'm sorry to say this, I hope no Ukrainian is offended by this, but for many of us in the West, this looked like a weird war. Far away, in the snows somewhere in eastern Ukraine. It was all in Russian, and many of us were probably thinking that actually maybe this is a civil war, and maybe this Russian community there has a case against the oppressive Ukrainian state. And I think quite a lot of us were happy to actually pretend that is the case. And weird war attracts weird people. And that's what you were getting in 2014, 15, 2016 to a lesser extent. And it was getting less and less. But this is how it looked like. 2022 was a completely different situation. So a mixed blessing, because the quality of these people sometimes was it was really questionable. Let's put it this way. Next point, the two sides of the same coin. The picture you see is the Rusich group. Michael is very much familiar with them. And, apparently it was only the far right and the neo-Nazis only flocked to the Ukrainian side. Now, Rusich group is a Russian, pro-Russian unit also containing foreigners. And look what they're doing. Sieg Heiling bonfire. How much more pagan far right this is? I don't know. Now, they were kind of conveniently forgotten to some extent earlier on, because the Nazis were with us off. No, they were also on the Russian side. The guys who were flocking to this war from the West, or for side A or B, regardless of whether they fought for side A or B, they had known each other from the war. They had no hard feelings towards each other because they were fighting each other. And there were really messages like, see you in Valhalla, brother. We'll see who's stronger. We'll see who's better, but no worries. Now, it leads me, and it is argued in the book, that this effectively is a postmodern war. If you are effectively projecting your own fantasies, your own political, acumen, inverted commas, onto a very foreign conflict, which is happening in a very foreign country, far, far away, in a language that you don't know, in a culture that you're not familiar with, this ends up looking like a postmodern war, that you're actually fighting for badges, you're fighting for friends, you're fighting for some totems. You're not fighting for the big isms, the big isms of the 20th century. This is very much a 21st century war for these foreign fighters. And there's a lot about this in my book. So if you're interested in that, you should do look it up. Now, let's go to the individual motivations. I love this photo. Meet Unité Continentale, the Continental Unity, allegedly the French-led foreign fighter unit, the only real, foreign fighter unit. Now, this was in the separatist ranks on the pro-Russian side. They have all sorts of flags here. French flag, Serbian flag, the Donetsk flag as well, the Novorossiyan flag, but the one on the right is best. This is the flag of the Spanish Republic of the 1930s, the one against which General Franco rebelled. So, the left-wing Republican side. Now, okay, fine, that's fine. But the French guys who are holding the French flag, they are French neo-Nazis, and they're standing next to each other, and that's no problem. Because they have one enemy that unites them all. They see every war as proxy. And every war is someone versus the horrible American imperialism. It can be Russia, it can be China, it can be Iran, it can be somebody else, but on the other side, you have American imperialism. And it can in reality be Ukraine or somebody else, but behind them, they're saying there's always they're fighting on behalf of America. And at the end of the day, these are the American interests. And as you know, European far left and European far right do not really like America and the US and their influence for all sorts of reasons, but they agree on not liking the US. So basically they become united here. And basically, there's an important element here in this setup that, they are going to such wars because they cannot do the things they do out there here. One of the French told me, for me, it's a kind of like a wake-up quote when he said, look, I won't do terrorism at home because I know I don't have a chance because there's so few of us at home. But if we go abroad and we kind of like, ingratiate ourselves with a broader formation, we can do the damage that we're not allowed to do at home, and we can come back home and no one's going to actually hold it against us because they will not, there will be nothing to throw at us legally. That is, an important perspective that needs to be remembered. We're actually, discussing why certain people from these milieus actually go to a foreign war because they can do stuff they cannot do at home. That is also something that needs to be remembered. Another point that I'm trying, that I'm making in the book, and meet Mikael Schild, the leading Swedish volunteer for Azov with Ukrainian friends. This is Mariupol 2014, by the way. The fighting looked a bit different 8 years before 2022 and the siege of Azovstal. This is how it looked like. Look at the equipment they're having. It's a completely different setup. It's a completely different way of war in this sense, and a different scale. The Swedes, as I argued to you earlier, and not only them, but they're the kind of poster boys here. They're saying, hey, I'm there because Russia is the traditional enemy. We have to fight them there, so they don't come here. And regardless of who we are, Mikael was an activist of all sorts of far-right or extreme-right organizations in Sweden. They would always tell you that I'm not really a threat to you, despite the fact that I might be far-right / neo-Nazi or whatever. The real threat to you is Russia. And back in 2014, when they were saying these things, and I mean, credit to them in a way, probably most of us would scratch our heads and say, well, it's far. It's in Donbass, it's in Donetsk, it's in Luhansk. The situation changes dramatically on the 24th of February, 2022, when, you can no longer pretend Russia's not coming, Russia's not around the corner, Russia's not a threat. So that, time proves them right, if I could put it this way, the passage of time in a way, which is weird, because they still are, some of them, essentially far-right activists. And this is why so many of us nowadays, and also for the right reasons, have such a hard time actually accepting that we are on the same side as these guys. In 2014, we could pretend that doesn't touch us. We're not really that much. We don't have that much in common with them. Whereas the situation in 2022 looks slightly different. Now, more red than brown. Meet the Czechs fighting in Ukraine on the Russian side. In the middle is Tomáš Foro, who wrote a great book about the Czech involvement in the war, and the two are fighters of the organization called the Czechoslovak Soldiers for Peace. This was an interesting organization, because this organization it comes together from the roots of a post-Soviet far-left internationalism, which is very much present in certain parts of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe, which sees Russia traditionally as the defender of that land against German or Western invasion. And they do still cling on to the repertoire of the kind of post-communist or even communist, not just graphics, but also rhetoric and certain ideological tenets. So they would be appalled and aghast if you actually call them brown or fascist or far right. Yet also, if you ask them about their attitudes to immigrants, LGBT, all sorts of other issues that are markers for, let's say, far right categorization, they very much fall into that category. But they would still wave a red flag at you and say that they are actually red. This is a very peculiar group, and this is a very peculiar group that will always try to convince you that peace is the most important quality that they're fighting for. Czechoslovak Soldiers for Peace. This was very much the Soviet Union's appeal to certain elements of, in the past, of Western European left, and not only left. Nowadays, it seems that elements of the, Central, Eastern, Southern Europe, Europe's left, or whatever we can call them, they are also, enamored by that very rhetoric. So remember that there are also some, red guys who basically are brown. This is the funny element. And of course, elephant in the room, the Russians. Here we have the Russian, Imperial Legion's troops out there. So essentially, this is the bizarre setup here, that the Russian state does help this mobilization, but it's not that all these guys were forcibly mobilized by Russia in 2014 to go and fight in Ukraine's civil war, inverted commas, in this hybrid war. They genuinely wanted to go themselves. If you were to check the discussions, especially on Vkontakte, the Russian equivalent of Facebook, before the eruption of the Russo-Ukrainian war in 2014, so around the Crimean, the invasion of Crimea, so let's say February, March, there is a plethora of rhetoric of we need to get organized, we need to get together, we need to move to Ukraine, we need to defend this, this, and that. And it only increases with the passage of time. So if anything happens, if Ukraine, announces anti-terrorist operation, so suddenly there's a spike in Russian recruitment and people saying, oh, now they're calling us terrorists, so we need to go and defend our brothers. So it's a kind of like a tit for tat. But it is genuinely done in a bottom-up fashion, but the state very much has a hand in that and has a hold on that very process. And these guys go into action in 2014. They they kind of stem the tide of Ukrainian advance at first, then cannot hold the line and need to be assisted by genuine Russian military towards the end of the summer of 2014. And they are then basically kept in some way, shape, or form in those people's republics as cannon fodder / essentially troops. The kind of rank and file troops that the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic are kind of lacking because so many people actually left them for the rest of Ukraine. So you have the first wave of refugees. Don't think that 2022 is the first wave of refugees. You have a massive refugee movement within Ukraine, the internally displaced persons in 2014. And obviously you need men, and you can have them from Russia. Some of them have some kind of connection to Ukraine through family, history, etc., 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 and they can pretend they're local. Oh, and they do pretend, sometimes with way more success, sometimes with less success, and that's why I'm saying the rest is history. And they are still out there in the units which belong to the alleged armies of the Army Corps of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, even though these were allegedly incorporated into Russia recently by the decree of President Putin. So they are still out there. And remember, those genuine fighters, the Russian ones, they have always been the biggest group. And that brings us to the 2022 situation, which is kind of the one that we should be spending the most time discussing, and we'll take a few minutes to actually tell you, because you probably to tell you all about that, and that is also in the book. So don't think that the book is all pure history. It is huge chunk of it is, but it also touches upon the situation in 2022, and I'm already writing the next one. So that kind of stay tuned for that. So essentially, what happens in 2022 is the following: on the 27th of February, President Zelensky comes out and says, "Look, that's 3 days after the beginning of the reinvasion, let's put it this way." He says, "We can have anyone. You can come. We will train you if that's needed. We'll give you a gun, and you can actually help us." So this is a call a bit along the lines of the Spanish International Brigades, if you like. That's the hope. And I remember having the discussions with Michael at the beginning of this, saying, well, not going to work, might not work because, the Russians are advancing. People don't want to join a losing side. People don't want to be kind of, embroiled in a defeat. Foreign fighters like success. They like hope, at least. And believe me, on February 27th, so almost a year ago, if you remember where you were, I was looking at this conflict very closely, and it didn't look very promising at the time. Obviously, the tide was already turning, but, lo and behold, not everyone knew that. But so Zelensky comes over and announces that, and here is the original sin of the religion. The Ukrainians are happy to allegedly take anyone. So both the trained and the untrained. And quite quickly do they realize that it's not going to work. That you have people of different quality, of different experience coming in, and you really need to do something about this. Therefore, the decision to split the legion, the international legion, into two. You have the legion, which is led by the Ukrainian military intelligence, and these are the more experienced ones. These, with lots of them with background in special operations forces from all sorts of countries, predominantly Western NATO countries, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK. This is the kind of core Anglo-Saxon. Then you have the locals, the quasi-locals, the Baltic states, Poland, Czech Republic, the likes of that. Then you have Western Europe. Then you have the exotic ones. I'm sorry to say this, but if someone's coming from Colombia to fight in Ukraine, for me, that is a pretty exotic situation. And, kudos to that very person. But that's not a kind of like a, obvious thing to do. And obviously, then on parallel tracks, you have units such as the Georgian National Legion or the Belarusian units, which are almost mono-ethnic. Therefore, they are in a category of their own, or even though it's the Belarusians who are actually the biggest foreign fighter contingent on the Ukrainian side at the very moment. Georgians are also way out there, but since Georgia is not a huge country, it cannot produce that many volunteers for the war effort, but there's lots of them, and they have taken the most casualties. So, again, credit to them, because they've been suffering in this sense. So you have two legions. One is with the Ukrainian military intel. One is basically infantry battalions under the Ukrainian, regular Ukrainian military. This is the split that happens. But to complicate matters further, it's not just two legions that you need to be looking at. You need to be looking at least 3 constituencies in 2022. You have the trainers, so foreigners who come in and train Ukrainians. You have humanitarians / logisticians. So for me, this is the biggest and the most influential group, because they can bring in, for example, 15 tons of supplies into Bakhmut just like that. Now, no amount of fighters will beat that, or at least not the available amount of fighters. And then obviously the third group is the fighters. who are not only in the two legions, but they are also split along different Ukrainian units, because any brigade commander in the Ukrainian military can sign a contract with a foreigner. That complicates the matters quite considerably. So for people like me, trying to account for all the experiences of the foreigners, it's really like trying to catch fish with my bare hands. They rotate, they go along, they change units. They go back home and then come back into Ukraine, because they go back home to rest, to gather more money, to bring in supplies, or to just, sort things out with their families. And then they come back. This is a constant movement and a constant flux of quite a considerable amount of people. So it's really hard to take a snapshot of this, but I'm trying my best. That's why I'm trying, I'm saying 3 constituencies that you need to be looking at. So the humanitarians are probably the most important. The fighters, the trainers are probably the smallest group and the ones that have it the roughest, because they train groups in the West. They train Ukrainian units in the West, and sometimes they get laughed at by the fighters who are saying, why don't you come and actually join the real fight? You're just sitting out there in the West. It is an unfair comment, by the way, but there are animosities between them. And what is important, people change their constituencies. They fluctuate between the 3. That's why I'm saying it's fish, trying to catch fish with bare hands. And maybe, to kind of like the biggest slide that I've got, and kind of sum it up, it's to show you the comparison between the two. 2014 and 2022, how different it is and how it evolved, what's important, to remember, and what is similar and what is dissimilar. So a couple of points here, and obviously I'm happy to take the discussion further, into the Q&A session. So essentially for me, it looks like this. The 2014 mobilization was very much ideological. Like I told you, these were the brown, red, brown, whatever guys. Weird war for weird people. 2022, well, yes, there are weird people there as well. Happy to talk about the weird ones of 2022 in the Q&A. But these are dwarfed by the concerned citizens of the world, the do-gooders, the sometimes liberal, sometimes centrist, sometimes left, sometimes right guys who were moved by the images coming out of Ukraine in early 2022 and are just saying, okay, I have to do something. This is the macro motivation. The trigger are always these images, especially, father putting children on a bus. That's a powerful image. It's always, the suffering of women and children that gets foreign fighters into any conflict, not just this one. Now, obviously, we can ask questions about the micro motivation, and there's lots of issues, and there's, it's very hard to generalize here. But again, it's a classic foreign fighter mobilization here. So I've done my share. I've done, I've got my money. I can go. My kids are grown up. I can go. That's one. Then you have someone saying, well, actually, I'm going for a bad divorce. I need some time off. I'm off. Then someone says, I'm in a dead-end job, and actually this is like a promising reset. I'll go. You have all sorts of micro motivations. Remember about that. Let's not generalize about them. Also happy to talk about this in the Q&A. But this is a difference that all the ones in 2022 will tell you, I'm here for the right reasons. I'm here because this is a, good versus evil war. Empire attacks the rebels, kind of Star Wars almost type of stuff. And this is where I am. Then secondly, it's not just fighters in 2022. Like I told you, there are different constituencies. In 2014, it's very much limited mostly to the fighters. There are humanitarians, but not so many, usually ideological humanitarians as well. And they don't play such a role as they can do, as they can play now. So this is an important and a crucial difference. And the 2014 mobilization is simply smaller at the end of the day. Now, the state, Ukrainian state in 2014 is not sure what to do with these foreigners. That's why it kind of dumps them on these volunteer battalions. And then the volunteer battalions also dump them on the most, let's say radical ones. Classic case are the Belarusians. Everyone just saying, oh, in 2014, you fought with Azov or right sector. Yes. But these were the only 2 that would have them. No other Ukrainian volunteer battalion at the time wanted Belarusians. Now, if they had the choice, would they go somewhere else? I can tell you yes. But this is the part of the legacy that they have to explain in 2022. Oh, why were you with Azov in 2014? Because they said, wait, I was fighting for Belarus, really, and nobody else would have me. So I didn't care about the logos and, and the swastikas of some of my Ukrainian colleagues. I just fought where I was. And that does not mean I'm a far-right person. That is literally the conversations, I've heard on a couple of occasions. Then the usefulness of the fighters in 2014, they really didn't make any difference. Like literally, there was too few of them. They weren't used properly on either side. And, Ukrainians kind of used them okay, but they could have done way, way better had there been more. In 2022, they're very useful as a PR tool. They raise the morale of the surrounding Ukrainian troops, especially if they're, for example, former special operations forces from places as the US, Canada, or places like that. That really gets the Ukrainian units going. That helps them to, achieve the unthinkable, let's put it this way. They are also useful on a tactical level. They will not make the change as they could have in 36 to 39 as the international brigades in Spain. Don't expect that, but they are useful tactically. The units that like I told you about the two legions, the legion led by the Ukrainian military intelligence, it does a lot in terms of reconnaissance activities. These teams, they form teams of 5, 10, 15 member foreigners, and they can do a lot of interesting stuff and a lot of scouting missions for the Ukrainian army. They can lay ambushes, they can help with all sorts of technical and tactical issues, so they can make a difference. But strategically, even in 2022, they do not make such a big difference. Do they form separate units in 2014? Not really. Elements within separate units, yes. In 2022, yes, you have the two legions, essentially, especially for the foreigners. They're led by Ukrainian officers, but it is separate units. In 2014, only a few units would have them. In 2022, technically, they are grouped in two and just on one side of the war. But like I told you, they are also spread around so many others. And probably the ones who have the best coverage on social media, for example, they're not parts of the legion. They're just attached to Ukrainian battalions or brigades and work from there. And yeah, they can still function in the context of the conflict. In 2014, they were present in Ukraine usually for a short term, not to overstay their visa, less than 90 days, go back home and then come back. In 2022, they joined the official Ukrainian military. Therefore, they are exempt from the visa rules, but they need to have their papers in order. And in certain cases, that has proven to be quite a challenge. But this is the case. This is the case in 2022. Now, in 2014, of course, they were on both sides. In 2022, they're really just on one. Regardless of all the discussions of the mercenaries, you have plenty of mercenaries on the other side, the Russian side in 2022. And this is the key difference. You have lots of gossip that the Russians will bring in Syrians, Central Africans. Well, not really. It's smaller numbers, and it's countries way more, more closer to Russia, using a similar alphabet. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Let's put it this way. PR-wise, in 2014, there's negative PR, it's the horrible guys of Azov, allegedly, and the horrible guys of the right sector. In 2022, well, despite the problems with the organization and the administration around the Legion, individual fighters have a good standing because they're fighting for freedom, they're fighting for democracy, they're even fighting for the West. So, what's not to like? In a sense, unless you find something really fishy and rotten, but that's maybe for the Q&A section. And now the returning volunteers, obviously, the question for 2014 and 2022. In 2014, there was just too few of them, so I would say not applicable. But in 2022, there's going to be more, but you shouldn't treat them as returnees. Your policies towards these guys should be softer. But I'm happy to explain what I mean by softer in the Q&A section. And I think I'll just leave you with this slide. Just don't forget the chaos, because there's so much chaos around around this war, around the volunteers, around the foreigners, that never trust someone who actually for example, gives you numbers, exact numbers, because there's so much movement. There's so much circulation, there's so many viewpoints, and generalizations should not apply. That's why I'll need some more time to actually finish up on the second book and work on a couple of issues, I hope, with CEP. So thank you for having me, and then over to you, Hans.